Was the Sabbath changed to Sunday? Or was the Sabbath changed, period? That could mean a couple different things. If I went to who changed the Sabbath? Listen, so the Bing AI search engine, just listen to this. I asked, how the Sabbath was changed? No punctuation. How the Sabbath was changed. This is what Bing AI gave me. Listen to this for a second. The Sabbath is a day of rest and worship that is observed by many religions. The seventh day of the week, Saturday, is considered the Sabbath in Judaism and Seventh-day Adventist churches. However, there's many other Sabbath-keeping churches, by the way. However, most Christians observe Sunday as the Sabbath, which they believe to be a memorial of Christ's resurrection. There are several theories about how the Sabbath was changed from Saturday to Sunday. By the way, it's not even Saturday, quote unquote. It's Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. So it's kind of a weird, but we say that colloquially, or in brief, it's Saturday as opposed to Sunday or something. Okay, but it goes on and says some people believe that the change was made by Constantine, the first Christian emperor of Rome, in the 4th century AD. Others believe that it was changed by the early Christian church as a way to distance itself from Judaism. However, there is no clear evidence to support either of these theories. Now, if you're an Adventist, you're going, no, Constantine changed it. Maybe you're thinking that, right? Hold on to that thought for a second. I agree with the AI. However, there's no clear evidence to support either of these theories. That's actually right, okay? But hold on to your hats for a second. According to BibleInfo.com, there is no New Testament evidence for a change of the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. The 10 Commandments given by God at Sinai instruct us to remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. The 4th commandment states that the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. Jesus himself referred to the Sabbath as the Lord's day. Matthew 12:8. In conclusion, while there are different beliefs about how and why the Sabbath was changed from Saturday to Sunday, there's no evidence to support any of them. It is important for each individual to study and understand their own beliefs about this topic. Now, Adventists say, no, the Pope changed it. But do you, wait a minute. You believe that? You think the Pope changed the Sabbath? I thought Daniel 7:25 said he'll think to change times and laws. See, nobody changed the Sabbath. You can't change the Sabbath. You know why? Because it's the day which God rested on. And so the Sabbath was implemented by God. And if people think they can read Paul or the New Testament as if just like an apostle can just change what God said is the Sabbath day, that's insane. There's evidence that early Christians celebrated Sunday, and some of them celebrated Sunday and kept the Sabbath. But that certainly doesn't mean they changed the Sabbath to Sunday. You can't change the Sabbath to Sunday. Just like you let's presume, which I believe is true, that Jesus rose on the day after the Sabbath, okay? The weekly Sabbath, okay? Some people think he's raised on Saturday. I think it's hard to imagine how that could be historically accurate, but they have arguments. But let's just presume Sunday is absolutely the day Jesus rose. He rose on the day after the Sabbath day ended, okay? Which I believe. You wouldn't like turn around and say, well, I worship or I celebrate the resurrection on Saturday because it's the new resurrection day. No. Jesus rose on Sunday, and so you might celebrate the resurrection on Sunday. Good for you. But that's not a reason in any sense. It's like, I celebrate since the Bible verse in Romans 14 says if the Romans 14 says don't venerate any day as special, then they certainly weren't saying the Lord's Day was Sunday. If that's what Paul is teaching in Romans 14, doesn't make any sense. Just because what you're really saying is, well, I don't have to keep the Sabbath because my tradition says that, because we don't do it, even though all of the every church in America right now is a derivative of Protestant derivatives or of a Protestant church. They all said up until Adventist church was established that Sunday was their Sabbath because it's one of the 10 Commandments. Everybody said that in church history, Protestant history. All of a sudden, there's no Sabbath when somebody points out that it's the wrong day. They don't have arguments. Now, all of a sudden, the Bible changes what it says to justify oneself. No, the commandments define sin, and sin is what you're saved from. If the law is done away with at the cross, you didn't need a gospel to save you because there is no law to be saved from when you break it. Sin is what we're saved from. Sin is transgression of the law. If there is no law, there is no sin. If there is no sin, you don't need a salvation from the condemnation. You don't need grace for something that doesn't apply to you. Okay? Nobody believed what you believe. Adventists aren't a cult for believing that. Modern Christianity is a cult for not believing it. Okay? All you have to do is read anybody and everybody of church history. So please stop making a fool of yourself and saying we're a cult because we believe that. We're being consistent and biblical. We're in agreement with the early church and the Protestants, except for in principle, okay? I'm not saying they all kept the Sabbath. It means, look, if somebody didn't keep the Sabbath because of their particular circumstances of where they were taught and what they learned, and they didn't see it, I'm not condemning them, okay? But like most of them, like particularly the early church fathers, some of them, it's questionable whether they were honoring the seventh-day Sabbath or not. Much more questionable than people realize if you actually study the manuscripts. But that being so, I would say some of them didn't keep the Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath, okay? But they all said that the 10 commandments stand, that they're eternal, that they existed before the Decalogue was given at Sinai. The 10 commandments, those laws of righteousness are eternal. They come from God himself. So when they talk about like the law not existing before Sinai, they're talking about the covenant as it was made at Sinai. But they still thought righteousness is righteousness that exudes from who God is. It's philosophically undeniable. The only thing you can say about the 10 commandments being different is you could say, well, it's not the covenant of the 10 commandments. Okay, fine. But when you're being conformed in the image of the Son, you're obeying the commandments that as they're listed in the 10 commandments as given. Those don't change. Maybe so many people unfortunately think of it as like, well, that's the covenant and the law's done away with. No, the covenant and the agreements and the punishments and everything is what is done away with, if you want to say anything's done away with, not the principles of love, of God's character. So is the Sabbath, did Constantine change the Sabbath? Well, of course he didn't, because you can't change the Sabbath, because it is the seventh day, because it is the day God rested. So people are so confused because everybody called Sunday their Sabbath, like in like the last several hundred years for certain, right? Of all denominations, doesn't matter what you are, Pentecostal, Charismatic, Baptist, Sunday was their Sabbath, and they kept the 10 commandments because they defined what sin is. They were confused. They didn't agree with you that you don't have to keep it. We just go to church no, you go to church on Sunday because people understood that as the Sabbath, because it got changed in their mind. Somebody changed it in their mind. But as far as like God's looking at it, you can't change the day God rested on. It's just a historical fact. God rested on the seventh day. That's the Sabbath. So Friday night to Saturday night is the 24-hour period called the Sabbath. It's Saturday, not Sunday. Feel free to worship God on Sunday and make up your own festival or whatever that God never said we're supposed to do, or that it's a law or it's a moral command. The moral command was rest on the Sabbath day and don't do commerce on it. Now, to my friends who think the law is done away with, I don't know what to tell you. Like, then you don't need a gospel. You're not saved because you didn't need saving. To those who understand that there's a law in Christ, which is the law of God through Christ, and if you believe in the Trinity, that Jesus and his Father are the same God, guess what? The laws of Christ are the same principles of love that they've always been, to love your neighbor and love God. And how do you do that? By obeying his commandments as he set forth in the Old Testament, because that's how God says you love God. And if you're actually doing it as prescribed, you're taking care of the widow too. It manifests the fruits of the Spirit, which we have in large measure since the new covenant was instituted and Jesus ascended. It's not in opposition. It's not in opposition to it, except for if you want to say that there's no civil theocracy where if we break them, we get killed. We have mercy and forgiveness. So the penal aspect of the 10 commandments as laid out in the Sinai covenant, that's not the same, because we had mercy poured out. But go and sin no more, says Jesus. It would be a shame if Jesus said, I don't really want you to keep my commandments of love anymore. That's not for you. That we should be saying, why would we think such a thing? Because they're good, right? Of course, we agree with God because we love God. And we said, we're done with our sin. We see that this is wrong. We need salvation from our sin. We agree with God and what he said is love because we recognized our sin, which are breaking his commands. And so you can't really, I'm not really sure how to think of it other than you're either confused or you're not a Christian if you don't agree with this. And I mean that, I don't mean that as like a harsh, mean thing. I mean, it's just like basic, like logic. God tells us what sin is. We repented of our sin. That's part of salvation, that we're saved from disobedience. And God is merciful, long suffering, and